Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the gallery was how quiet it was. The kind of quiet that hums beneath the surface of wealth and judgment. People spoke in low, careful tones, their words floating like cigarette smoke in the air. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 36 years old and I live mostly out of suitcases. My work takes me from Florence to Chicago to Prague, restoring paintings that have been forgotten or broken, breathing life back into things that can no longer speak for themselves. I don't talk much. I don't have to. The art does that for me. That day, I had been invited, or maybe dragged, into something called a cross-exposure event, a live evaluation and demonstration of art, restoration, and critique. It wasn't my kind of thing. I prefer to work alone, without an audience holding wine glasses and smirks. But my unit of restorers was asked to merge with young art students and critics for the show, and apparently, someone thought I'd make a good example. The gallery director, a tall man with sharp glasses, led me to Station 7. It was on the far end of the room, away from the clusters of bright-eyed students and loud critics, deliberately isolated. I recognized the move. Station 7 was meant for the quiet ones, the ones no one expects to impress. As I set out my tools, fine sable brushes, a set of soft-tipped cotton swabs, and tiny bottles of carefully mixed pigments, I heard my name announced over the microphone. Mara Ellison, Restoration Specialist. Station 7. The crowd turned, some curious, others already disinterested. I wasn't a painter they could praise or dismiss with a single glance. I wasn't here to show them some flashy new technique. I was here to fix what had been broken. That never earns applause. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 15 years, a voice that turned my spine rigid. Well, the man said, loud enough for the front row to chuckle. They're letting technicians into the artist's arena now? I didn't have to look to know it was him, my father, Christopher Ellison, the celebrated art critic with a taste for cruelty disguised as intellect. The last time we spoke, I was 21 and walking out of his house for good. Now, here he was, leaning back in his chair, his silver hair glowing under the gallery lights, that same smug, half-smile on his face. She's got steady hands, I'll give her that, he said. But steady hands don't make an artist, do they? Anyone can be careful. A ripple of laughter followed, mostly from the younger critics who probably idolized him. My chest tightened, but I didn't look up. I dipped my brush into the thinnest layer of varnish, focusing on the cracked corner of the 17th century painting in front of me. I wanted to say something, anything, but I'd learned long ago that silence was sharper than any reply. So I stayed quiet, letting his words hang in the air like smoke. Still, I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. This was exactly what he wanted, for me to feel small. I wasn't going to give him that. I straightened my back, adjusted the magnifying lens, and whispered to myself, "Just work, Mara." The 17th century painting in front of me was fragile, almost ghostly. Its surface was a network of cracks, the colors muted to a dull haze. Most restorers would have played it safe, sticking to light cleaning and a gentle varnish. But that wasn't why I was here. If I let my father's words crawl under my skin, I'd lose focus. So I blocked him out, the way I'd done since I was a teenager. I set my tools in order, scalpels fine as needles, custom mixed pigments, and a series of tiny brushes no bigger than a strand of hair. I dipped a swab into a mild solvent and began working on a small corner, clearing away centuries of grime in slow, precise strokes. The crowd's chatter softened, curiosity replacing the laughter. "Is she really doing that live?" someone whispered. "She'll ruin it," another muttered. I ignored them. My hands knew what they were doing. Every movement was deliberate. The solvent revealed a streak of bright blue beneath the murky surface, a color that hadn't been seen for generations. I heard the whispering stop. Even the younger critics leaned closer, their skepticism turning to awe. One of the students at the neighboring station dropped his brush with a clatter. "No one attempts this under pressure," he said, almost to himself. I didn't look up. I kept going, slowly unveiling the hidden brilliance of the painting. It was like breathing life into a body long thought dead. The gallery director approached, standing just behind my shoulder. "That technique," he said quietly, "I've seen it only once before. Florence, 10 years ago, on the cathedral ceiling." My brush paused for just a second. He knew. "You left a mark there," he continued, "the faint signature pattern in the layering. I recognize it." I said nothing. I never confirm or deny my work publicly, but his tone told me he already knew the truth. The room had gone completely silent now. I could feel the audience watching, even my father. I risked a glance in his direction. His smug smile was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen on his face in years: doubt. He leaned forward, as if trying to understand how I was pulling this off. I switched to a microbrush and began the retouching phase, blending pigments so seamlessly that the restored section became indistinguishable from the original. When I stepped back, even I felt a flicker of pride. The painting looked as though time had never touched it. The director gave a small nod of respect. "You've just surpassed the benchmark restoration of this piece," a feat they said was impossible. The crowd erupted in quiet murmurs of astonishment. My father's face had turned pale, his jaw tight. For once, he had nothing clever to say. I placed my brush down carefully, my hands steady. I didn't need applause or validation. The painting spoke for itself, and it spoke louder than his mockery ever could. I learned early on that silence could be both armor and prison. Growing up in the Ellison household meant living under the shadow of my father's voice, sharp, commanding, and rarely kind. He wasn't just a man, he was a brand. Christopher Ellison, the art critic who could make or break a career with a single review. My mother faded into the background, content to orbit around his brilliance, and my older brother, Adrian, was the chosen one, the prodigy who absorbed every word of my father's opinions like gospel. Adrian always had the spotlight. He wrote essays my father called astonishing for someone his age, while my attempts at sketching or painting earned a dismissive, "It's fine, but it says nothing." I can still hear the way he'd tap his finger on my drawings like they were cheap imitations of real art. "You have steady hands, Mara. Maybe you should consider something more practical. Critique instead of creation. Or better yet, nothing at all." I was 17 when I first touched an old, cracked painting in the school storage room. While everyone else focused on theory, I spent hours alone, carefully cleaning a layer of grime from a forgotten canvas. For the first time, I felt like I was breathing life back into something that had been ignored. Something like me. When I told my father I wanted to pursue restoration, his response was ice cold. "You'd rather be a janitor of art than a voice that shapes culture? Wasting your mind on cleaning what other people create? Pathetic." Adrian smirked from across the table, soaking in the compliment hidden in my father's insult. That was the last family dinner I remember clearly. I left home at 21 with a single suitcase and a small grant for a restoration program in Florence. He didn't say goodbye. My mother handed me an envelope of cash, but she didn't look me in the eye. Adrian never called. I learned to stop expecting approval and built my career without their voices in the room. The truth is, my father's contempt made me stronger. Every cutting remark became a kind of fuel. I worked endless nights, restoring pieces so fragile they crumbled under the wrong kind of breath. I made a name for myself among curators and museums who valued precision over noise. But even now, standing in that gallery, part of me still felt 17, the quiet girl with paint-stained fingers, waiting for someone to see her. My father had always called me the quiet one, as if silence was weakness. I knew better now. Silence was survival, and eventually, silence could become power. The gallery buzzed again as the next phase of the event began. I stayed at Station 7, cleaning my tools while the younger critics hovered nearby. Their laughter low but deliberate, they mimicked my quiet posture, whispering things like, "She's just playing it safe," and "Anyone can copy a painting if they're patient enough." I didn't need to look up to know where that tone came from. My father's presence was like a shadow stretching across the room, dark and heavy. "You know," he said suddenly, standing to address the room, "restoration is a kind of hiding place. It's easy to hide behind someone else's work and pretend you have a gift. But real artists, real masters, can create or save something even when the task is impossible." The younger critic straightened, waiting for his next line like it was scripture. Then he looked straight at me. "Mara," he said, his voice smooth and calculated, "why don't you show us what you can really do? A real challenge, just for fun." I lifted my gaze to meet his. "What kind of challenge?" He gestured to a heavily damaged fragment laid out on a separate table, a piece so fragile that most restorers wouldn't touch it without weeks of preparation. "This one," he said, "if you can clean even a square inch without ruining it, I might reconsider my opinion." The crowd chuckled nervously. I could feel their eyes waiting for me to flinch or refuse, but I didn't. I simply walked over, gloves already on, and said, "Fine." The laughter stopped. I examined the surface under the magnifier. Centuries of grime caked onto a layer so thin it could tear under a single careless stroke. My father leaned back, clearly expecting me to fail. I tuned out his presence, focusing only on the rhythm of my breath and the faint textures in front of me. With a microswab, I began to remove the first veil of dirt. Each pass was painstakingly slow, but the colors beneath emerged like tiny sparks of life. The crowd leaned in closer. I heard someone whisper, "She's actually doing it." I switched tools seamlessly, balancing chemical precision with featherlight brushwork. Within minutes, a patch of the original paint gleamed through, untouched and vibrant. I felt the weight of silence behind me, a silence far heavier than mockery. When I stepped back, the fragment looked transformed, its hidden depth restored without a single misstep. The director let out a quiet exhale. "Extraordinary," he murmured. I glanced toward my father. His face was pale, his lips pressed tightly together as if the words he wanted to say had turned to ash. I cleaned my brush, set it down, and returned to Station 7. I didn't look for applause. I didn't need it. The silence in that room, the stunned respect, was louder than anything my father had ever said to me. The applause from my flawless restoration still echoed in my ears when I slipped into the gallery's side office. While the others mingled over wine and congratulatory chatter, I sat at a desk stacked with documents I'd been quietly collecting for months. Tonight wasn't just about skill, it was about the truth that had been festering behind the curtain of the art world, and my father's handprints were all over it. I'd first suspected something was wrong when a client in Vienna asked me to review a 17th century portrait they had purchased at an auction. Its provenance paperwork was impeccable, too impeccable. Every signature, every date lined up perfectly, like it had been manufactured by someone who knew how to make things look old, but never truly authentic. After weeks of cross-referencing archives, the trail led back to a network of art dealers with one common connection: my father's recommendations. I flipped open a folder now, my hands steady but my jaw tight. Inside were photocopies of 3 forged certificates, each one tied to high-value pieces he had praised publicly. My father's reviews weren't just opinions, they were weapons. A single glowing column from him could inflate a painting's value tenfold, and if that painting wasn't legitimate, it didn't matter, his words made it so. But that wasn't the worst discovery. Buried in a bundle of correspondences, I found a letter addressed to the director of a European restoration project I'd applied 2 years ago. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father had written, "Mara Ellison is technically skilled, but lacks the insight and intellectual rigor required for high-level cultural work. I advise against her inclusion." I stared at the sentence for a long time when I first uncovered it, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. He hadn't just dismissed me as an artist, he had deliberately sabotaged me. As I organized the documents, I realized that his influence had cost me more than personal acknowledgement. It had shaped my entire career path, forcing me to claw my way forward while doors quietly shut in my face. Every hard-won contract, every sleepless night restoring pieces for smaller institutions, carried the hidden weight of his interference. I tucked the letters into a leather folder and looked through the office window at the gallery's main floor. My father stood in a circle of critics, gesturing with his glass of wine like a king holding court. He would never expect his own daughter to pull the rug out from under him. But this wasn't revenge. It was justice, for the art, for the collectors who trusted the wrong voices, and for the truth he buried under ego. This exhibition was more than a performance. It was the stage I needed. I would not humiliate him with insults or pettiness. I would expose him with facts, his own handwriting, his own manipulations. And when the room was ready, I would let the truth speak louder than any of his reviews ever could. The gallery's main hall was transformed overnight. The exhibition tables were replaced with long rows of seats, a small stage, and a projector screen. Word had spread quickly. Patrons, museum officials, and critics crowded in, sensing that something seismic was about to unfold. I stood off to the side, the leather folder of documents pressed against my chest. My hands weren't shaking, but I could feel the weight of every step that had brought me here. The gallery director opened the session with an air of uneasy formality. "Tonight we address concerns regarding authenticity, provenance, and ethical standards in the art world," he said, his voice echoing against the high ceiling. Mara Ellison has requested to present findings that affect not only this exhibition, but the credibility of several major collections. The murmuring started immediately. My father, seated in the front row, crossed his arms and leaned back, the picture of confidence, or maybe denial. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. His silence was as pointed as his insults had once been. I took the stage, unclipping the folder and laying the first document on the table. For months, I began, keeping my tone calm and measured. I've been tracking a series of forged provenance records tied to high-value art pieces. These forgeries weren't random. They were funneled through a network of dealers and critics whose endorsements gave them credibility. I looked directly at my father. One name appears on almost every path of influence: Christopher Ellison. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I moved through each piece of evidence, certificates, letters, and financial logs, projecting them on the screen behind me. There was no mistaking the handwriting, the signatures, the dates that lined up too perfectly. I paused before the final page, the letter where he had sabotaged my candidacy for the European project. This, I said quietly, is personal, but it also proves a pattern of manipulation and abuse of power. His words didn't just shape opinions, they closed doors for honest artists and restorers. The director rose from his seat, scanning the documents like they were shards of a broken monument. "These records are authentic?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Every one of them has been verified by independent archivists." All eyes turned to my father. For once, he didn't stand or speak. His jaw tightened, and I saw something almost human flicker in his expression. Recognition, maybe even shame. But he said nothing. Not a single defense. The silence in that hall was heavier than any applause I'd ever received. This was not triumph, it was truth laid bare. I gathered my papers, feeling the tension dissolve into a stunned quiet. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want revenge. I wanted him to finally see that integrity, the thing he dismissed in me, had outlasted his reputation. The tribunal ended, but the ripples from that night stretched far beyond the gallery walls. Within days, the art world's headlines were divided. Some praised me for having the courage to confront decades of corruption, while others accused me of tearing down my own father for personal recognition. I didn't care for either opinion. I hadn't done it for applause or revenge. I'd done it because it was the truth. Still, there was a strange emptiness in the silence that followed. My father didn't speak to the press, nor did he attempt to contact me. I told myself I preferred it that way, yet I couldn't ignore the hollow feeling every time I saw his name removed from another committee or exhibition. His empire of influence had fallen, and the quiet that came with it was both freeing and unsettling. A week later, a thin envelope arrived at my studio. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was his. Inside, on a single page, he wrote, "You were stronger than I ever believed you could be. I can't undo the years I dismissed you, but I see you now." There was no apology, no grand gesture of reconciliation, just an acknowledgement I'd waited half a lifetime to hear. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It didn't erase the past, but it felt like a door closing. In the months that followed, I stepped away from high-profile projects. I started mentoring young artists and restorers, inviting them into my studio to teach what no lecture could explain: the patience to see what others overlook, the courage to work without seeking applause. I told them that artistry isn't about fame. It's about listening to the voice of the piece in front of you and letting it guide your hands. When I returned to the same gallery months later, it was not as a competitor, but as an instructor. The director greeted me warmly, leading me back to the exhibition floor where it all began. Station 7 was still there, quietly waiting in the corner. "People ask about this station," he said with a faint smile. "We don't assign it to anyone anymore. It's become yours, in a way." I placed my tools on the table, teaching the students how to hold their brushes, how to mix pigments without rushing. At the end of the day, I left a small engraved plaque on the corner of Station 7, "Reserved for the one who listens." Some of the students asked me what it meant. I only smiled. For years, I'd believed that being quiet made me invisible, but I finally understood that my silence had been my strength all along. The world had been loud enough. My work spoke louder than words ever could. The gallery was quiet the morning I decided to leave it behind. Not forever. Just as my center of gravity. I walked through the familiar halls, the same walls that had once felt like a battlefield and now felt like home. The students I had mentored over the past year were setting up for a new workshop, their laughter soft and nervous. They didn't know this would be my last day teaching here. Station 7 sat exactly as I'd left it, its wood surface polished from years of work. The plaque I had placed there, reserved for the one who listens, gleamed faintly in the morning light. I ran my fingertips over it, the cool metal grounding me, and began packing my tools. The fine sable brushes, the jars of pigment, the blades that required a surgeon's steadiness. These tools had defined me for half my life, but now it was time they defined someone else. "You're leaving us?" One of my apprentices, a young woman named Claire, asked when she saw me boxing my materials. "I'm passing it on," I said. "The work belongs to you now, all of you." She looked startled, as if I'd just handed her a priceless artifact. "But no one can do it like you." I smiled faintly. "That's the point. You're not supposed to do it like me. You're supposed to do it like you." For years, I had carried the weight of proving myself to people who never intended to understand me. My father, the critics, the crowd that fed off easy judgments. But teaching these students, watching them fight for the patience and focus that true restoration required, had shown me something I'd forgotten. The work wasn't about recognition. It was about care. I placed my oldest brush, the one with the worn wooden handle I'd carried since Florence, into Claire's hands. "This was my first," I told her. "Every mistake I made started with this brush. It taught me what silence can do." As I zipped up the last case of pigments, I took one final look at Station 7. It didn't need me anymore. It had become something larger, a quiet testament to perseverance, discipline, and the art of listening. I walked out of the gallery without ceremony, the late afternoon sun warming my back. I didn't need applause, or headlines, or even my father's approval. What I left behind, the students, the station, the quiet legacy of careful hands, was enough. My greatest work wasn't a painting or a restoration. It was the calm strength I'd learned to pass on, quietly, to those who came after me.